Hi everyone, I'm Julie Hartman. Brittany Griner has been released from Russian prison as part of a prison swap. 3,000 police are deployed to arrest 25 right-wing militants in Germany. And a thought experiment: how would we be different without social media? This is Timeless. Hi everyone, and welcome again. Today is December 8th, 2022, the 6th episode of Timeless. For those of you who watch this live, I want to quickly apologize to you. I know that we're starting a tiny bit late, but I can promise you that it is worth it because I was filming an interview with a very special person. You will see that interview on Timeless next week. So it was for a good reason that we are late. The first news story we're going to talk about today is that Brittany Griner, the WNBA player who was sentenced to 10 years in prison for bringing marijuana cartridges into Russia, has officially been released from Russian prison as part of a prisoner swap that took place in the UAE, according to President Biden. Griner was detained in Russia in February of this year while visiting the country to play in a Russian basketball league in her WNBA offseason. Those of you who don't know what WNBA is, it's the women's NBA. But at the airport, Russian security found marijuana vape cartridges in Griner's bag, and they arrested her, citing that marijuana is illegal under Russian law. Griner was sentenced to 10 years in a Russian labor camp. So President Biden, in exchange for Griner to return home to the United States, has traded her for a man who is a Russian arms dealer named Victor Bout. Victor Bout is also known as the Merchant of Death. There's actually a really good Nicolas Cage movie about Bout called Lord of War, which you should watch if you're interested. And a quick background on him is that when the Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991, and all of the chaos and bad record keeping and everyone scrambling to set themselves up, Bout used his connections to buy tons and tons of small weapons, and he ended up selling them principally to third world countries that have had civil wars. He sold most of them over the past few years to countries in Africa that have been war-torn, the most famous one being Liberia in the 90s, and he would actually sell arms to both sides. And he got super wealthy off of this because when the Soviet Union was disintegrating, a lot of people thought, oh, well, why would I buy arms? There's no need for arms anymore. But he was smart to buy them so that he could then sell them in the future. So Bout was in the United States for serving a 25-year sentence for conspiring to kill Americans. And now he is free in exchange for Brittany Griner. So let's hear President Biden talk about this prison swap and bringing Brittany Griner back home.
Folks, and it is a good morning. Moments ago, standing together with her wife Sherelle in the Oval Office, I spoke with Brittany Griner. She's safe, she's on a plane, she's on her way home after months of being unjustly detained in Russia, held under intolerable circumstances. Brittany will soon be back in the arms of her loved ones, and she should have been there all along. She wrote to me back in July. She didn't ask for special treatment, even though we've been working on a release from the day one. She requested a simple quote: "Please don't forget about me and the other American detainees. Please do all you can to bring us home." We never forgot about Brittany. We've not forgotten about Paul Whelan, who's been unjustly detained in Russia for years. This was not a choice of which American to bring home. We brought home Trevor Reed when we had a chance early this year. Sadly, for totally illegitimate reasons, Russia is treating Paul's case differently than Brittany's. And while we have not yet succeeded in securing Paul's release, we are not giving up.
Today my family is whole, but as you all are aware, there's so many other families who are not whole. And so BG's not here to say this, but I will gladly speak on her behalf and say that BG and I will remain committed to the work of getting every American home, including Paul, whose family is in our hearts today. As we celebrate BG being home, we do understand that there are still people out here who are enduring what I endured the last 9 months of missing tremendously their loved ones. So thank you everybody for your support. And today is just a happy day for me and my family. So I'm gonna smile right now. Thank you.
So this is great for Brittany Griner, but there was someone who was left behind in this prison swap. Paul Whelan is a former United States Marine who was about 3 years right now into serving a 16-year sentence in Russia. And he was imprisoned back in 2018 for supposedly committing espionage, for, again, supposedly spying on Russia on behalf of the United States. And unlike Griner, who pled guilty to her offense of carrying the marijuana cartridges, Whelan and the U.S. government have repeatedly said that these espionage charges are baseless. It's difficult to understand why the United States wouldn't trade first for the person who has been over there longer and is serving a longer prison sentence. It seems to me that if you can only get one of them back, it seems more principled to get the one who has been in custody longer and who is serving a much longer prison sentence if you believe that we are all equal in front of the law. But unfortunately, it seems that the U.S. government under President Biden does not view these two individuals as equals. There seems to be a two-tiered system of justice in this country. If you're a celebrity, particularly a celebrity who is aligned with or useful to the Democrats, as Brittany Griner is, or if you fit into an intersectionality category, you get much better treatment from the United States government these days than if you aren't in those categories. If you look at the balancing of the equities in this situation, that the charges against the Marine were bogus, whereas the charges against Griner were apparently true, at least they haven't been denied, that Whelan has been in custody for longer and has served a longer prison sentence, and that Whelan is a veteran and Brittany Griner isn't, it would seem like in the balancing of those equities, if you could only get one prisoner back, it's that the U.S. government should insist that Whelan, the Marine, should get released first. But Brittany Griner is Black. She's a lesbian, a female, and a celebrity, a basketball player. So on multiple levels of intersectionality, she is above a white male United States Marine. She seems to be more resonant with Biden supporters and their donors. And so that may be why he traded for her instead of for him. This story, though, is unfortunately just one of the other examples that we've seen recently of this two-tiered justice system. Sam Bankman-Fried, or SBF, this is the guy I've been reporting on for the past week who is embattled in this cryptocurrency scandal. He donated tens of millions of dollars to Democrats. And when his whole cryptocurrency fraud became exposed, he really didn't have the United States government coming after him. He remains in the Bahamas at liberty and has not been taken into custody. But on the other hand, Merrick Garland, over the past few weeks, has sent FBI SWAT teams, about 30 heavily armed people each, to arrest fathers whose only offense was praying in front of abortion clinics. Yes, this is our country now. This government, this president, his administration, especially his Justice Department and now his State Department, don't care about how overt they are, that they consider conservatives or people who don't fit on the intersectionality scale as second-class citizens in this country. And that's the scariest part of all of this. Moving on to another news story in Germany, 25 people were arrested yesterday in Berlin who were accused of planning to overthrow the German government. These 25 people are members of a right-wing group called Reichsbürger. The Reichsbürger people are led by Prince Heinrich XIII, whose family was the royal family in a German principality until World War I, when Germany became a country and not an empire. And as an aside, there aren't German princes today, but it's a German custom to let people keep these titles if they were royalty under the empire, but these titles don't mean anything anymore. So this Reichsbürger movement essentially holds that the whole post-war German government is illegitimate. They tend to favor the system under the German Empire, and they say that the current government should be replaced with the sovereign government led by them. So these 25 militants were accused of plotting to take over the parliament building, the Reichstag, and they were also accused of plotting to assassinate Olaf Scholz, who is the current chancellor of Germany. And so what I found to be interesting in reading this story is that in order to arrest these 25 people, the German government deployed 3,000 police officers who raided over 150 locations. To me, doesn't that just kind of seem like a lot for arresting 25 people, having 3,000 police officers? Germany in the 1970s and even much of the 1980s was taken over in the streets by these liberal and left-wing militant groups who were planning assassinations, and they were plotting to kidnap people, and they were planting bombs in the street. One of the terrorist groups was a communist group. It was called the Baader-Meinhof Gang. And they weren't just plotting to assassinate people. They did assassinate people. And they wanted to overthrow their government and establish a communist government in Germany. And so, according to my knowledge of this history, there wasn't anything close to what's being done in response to these 25 militants. There wasn't anything close being done to those left-wing terrorist groups when they were wreaking havoc in Germany in the 70s and 80s. So the difference in law enforcement response with these two situations is difficult for me to understand, but we will continue to keep you updated should the situation escalate. So that's our news segment for today, but before we move on to a thought experiment that I want to do, I want to play for you one fun clip that I saw yesterday. So the CEO of Kroger Supermarkets, which is looking to merge with Albertsons Supermarkets, appeared before a Senate committee yesterday because there's Democratic opposition in the Senate to allow those two grocery store companies to merge. The Democrats say that it would be anti-competitive by allowing these markets to merge into big corporations because there would be fewer choices of supermarkets for consumers. Over the last few years, Kroger, like so many other corporations, has succumbed in its training and corporate policies to promoting DEI and other leftist ideas. So yesterday, Republican Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas had a wonderful brief remark to the CEO of Kroger, who apparently was expecting Republican support for his proposed merger. Let's play the clip.
You know, this situation reminds me a little bit of the situation big tech companies have found themselves in recent years. They've come to Washington because they fear regulation from our Democratic friends or action by the Biden administration, and they expect Republicans, who are traditionally more supportive of free enterprise, to come to their defense. And I've cautioned them for years that if they silence conservatives and center-right voters across the country, if they discriminate against them in their company, they probably shouldn't come and ask Republican senators to carry the water for them whenever our Democratic friends want to regulate them or block their mergers. So I've heard a lot of questioning about that today, and I've read a lot about it in the news. And I'll say this: I'm sorry that's happening to you. Best of luck.
Now, in the second half of the show, I want to do a little thought experiment with you. According to USwitch, which is a British research site, Americans spend an aggregate of 57 days out of the year on social media. That is 15% of our year. And it's just social media. It doesn't even count the time that we spend watching TV or watching Netflix or being on our laptops. And if you combine that 15% with our sleeping time, which makes up about a third of our year, that means that between social media and sleeping, 50% of our year is out the window. Social media, as some of us know, is a brand new phenomenon in American history. It's not even 20 years old. Facebook was founded in 2004, Twitter in 2006, and Instagram in 2010. In the past 2 decades, the way that most Americans spend their time has drastically changed. And we don't acknowledge that when the way that we spend our time changes, we as people also change. So it raises the question, what would we be like? What would our personalities be like without social media? So I want to go back in time, and not just to the hunter-gatherer years with zero technology, but let's just go back 23 years to 1999, the year that I was born. Let's imagine what the world looked like then. Some of us haven't lived in that world, and for others, things have changed so much since then that they may not remember it well. So there were no smartphones in 1999. Instead, cell phones were flip phones, primarily from Motorola and Nokia. Some phones had text messaging, but they were difficult, primitive technology. You would depress the number and keep clicking until you got to each letter. And the only reason why I know this is because my dad still has a flip phone, and it's very difficult to text on those devices. The internet did exist back in '99. You could look things up and communicate with people via email, but internet and email weren't available on phones as they are now. There was no YouTube, no Facebook, no Twitter, no Instagram, no Snapchat. There were online chat rooms that allowed small groups of strangers to communicate with one another, which, by the way, probably facilitated more conversation, because now on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, you just solitarily post things. So those chat rooms probably better allowed you to converse with a group of people, albeit over a screen. Another thing about the 90s is that Amazon existed, but it was still a young company, and it primarily sold books and CDs. There was no such thing as Amazon Prime, and in fact, some people on Wall Street thought that Amazon was going to go out of business. Boy, were they wrong about that. There was nothing like Postmates or Instacart, Uber Eats, Grubhub, or DoorDash. Streaming did not exist. If you wanted to watch a movie, you would either watch whatever was playing on the TV channel, or more commonly, you would go to the theater, or you'd go to Blockbusters and rent a DVD. And so I was telling my uncle about my doing this segment, this thought experiment of what life would be like, what we would be like if we didn't have the technology that we did today. And he told me something that I thought was so cute. He said that if you wanted to know what movie was playing in theaters, you would call this thing called Movie Phone, which apparently started in 1989 and it closed in 2014. And you'd pick up your phone, apparently. I never did this, but I was told that you'd pick up your corded phone, you would dial 1-800-777-FILM, and it would ask you these questions like, what zip code are you in? And you'd type in your zip code, and then it would guide you through movies available and the times and locations near to you. So for those of you who are watching who did use Movie Phone and do know what Movie Phone is, I want to play an audio of Russ Leatherman's opening of Movie Phone. Let's play it, Sean.
Hello and
Welcome to Movie Phone. If you know the name of the movie you'd like to see, press 1. To select from a list of current movies, press 2.
When I started doing the voice years and years ago,
There's Russ Leatherman talking about, the video that I was playing was Russ Leatherman doing an interview of how he would recite the Movie Phone thing. But I just wanted to play that first part for you to jog your memory for those of you who did use it. Again, I think it's so cute because it's so foreign to me that You would have to pick up the phone and figure out where movies were playing. So back to the list. I have 3 more for you. iPods did not exist in the 90s. If you wanted to listen to music, you'd have to listen to a CD or the radio. By the way, I have no idea how people were able to go on runs and not be miserable without an iPod or listening to music. Print newspapers and magazines were also still a big thing, and there were still newsstands in big cities as well as sidewalk kiosks that sold them. Cable TV was also still far more dominant as far as getting news than the internet. And one of the things in the late 90s that signaled that the internet news was soon to replace mainstream media in prominence was that in 1998, so the year before I was born, Newsweek magazine had all the information about the Clinton-Monica Lewinsky affair, but they weren't quite comfortable publishing it, which seems crazy today because anytime the media can get their claws on a juicy scandal, they have no problem with publishing it. But back then, Newsweek was kind of on the fence. And so at that time, a virtually unknown website called The Drudge Report scooped Newsweek on the story. Matt Drudge put the story on his website, and he leaked all of the important details of the scandal, like the fact that Ken Starr, who was the independent counsel who was investigating Whitewater, knew about Clinton's affair with Lewinsky. And so that was the first time that an internet company in a big way got the story first. And so it marked the beginning of the internet news companies eating the lunch of the legacy media. But still, the legacy media was prominent. And finally, GPS was only in its early years in the 90s. It did not become, or it did, become commercially available in 1997, but most cars didn't have it. So if you wanted to go somewhere, you'd get on the internet and print out directions on MapQuest, or you would go to a gas station and get a map and just figure it out yourself. So again, I'm bringing this up to highlight that things were really different just 23 years ago. And I want us to consider, what would we be like if we had to live with the technology back then? This thought experiment is not about how much more difficult would ordinary things be if we lived in the 90s, but rather, how would it change us? Even with living with the technology of just 23 years ago, I suspect that we would be different in fundamental ways. First, people would have to start talking to one another in person more than they do now. If you were in a Starbucks waiting for a drink, you literally did not have the option to look at your phone. And I know that doesn't seem like a big deal, but let's consider that for a moment. You would just have to stand there and make eye contact with people. And you might see someone in a Starbucks in the 90s with a cell phone, but they would be talking and not texting. So their eyes would still be up to look around the store, which is huge because it literally opens you up to the world. Because in the 90s you didn't have the option to the same extent as we do now to look down at your phone, it made talking to people or interacting with people less weird. So if you are, again, waiting for a drink at a Starbucks, it's not as weird in the 90s to see a cute guy and make eye contact with him and start talking to him. But now that we have texting and social media and smartphones as opposed to flip phones or cell phones, you're kind of seen as a needy weirdo if you strike up a conversation with a stranger that goes beyond just a few words, because you have that other option to be looking at your phone. You also, in the 90s with this technology, you needed to talk to people more, just simply to find things out, like information or directions. Before QR codes that you could scan and it would tell you information, before you could go on Google and see until what time a supermarket is open, if there was something that you needed to know, you would have to call someone, or God forbid, even go visit the place and ask some questions. When was the last time that any of us were in a part of town that we didn't know well, And we had to get out of our cars and actually ask a stranger for directions. No one does that anymore because no one needs to. And this shows that Dennis Prager's influence is having an effect on me, because I just can't help but think about all of the potential significant others that we have missed out on meeting because we have something like a GPS or these devices to solve problems for us. In addition to needing to talk to people just simply to get help with things, you needed to know how to do more things in the 90s because, again, you didn't have Google right there to help you. In other words, you had to be a more competent person. Before GPS, you needed to know how to read a map. In the 90s, I read that when Netflix was an early company, they would mail you DVDs of movies that you wanted to watch, and when you were done, you had to know how to mail the DVD back. And I just thought, as pathetic as it sounds, people my age would probably struggle with knowing how to mail back a DVD. For us, mailing things that are bigger than an envelope is hard. And again, I'm not trying to throw shade. For me, it is difficult. You have to go and get a box, seal the box, get a packaging label, know whether to drop it off at a UPS, FedEx, or post office. So now, again, we've kind of become spoiled because we don't need to know how to do basic tasks in the same way that we did need to know how to do them back in the day. Another thing is that if we had the 90s technology today, we would have to plan things more, which I think would be a good thing for us. In the 90s, going to a movie theater was a social bonding activity that you would do with other people because you had to make a point of making the arrangements. You had to call movie phone or go in the newspaper and figure out where the theaters were and what times they were playing movies. And if you were going to go out of your way to make arrangements to do something, it was more likely that you were going to want to invite people and make the effort worth your while. And this is just so fundamentally different from what we do now, just curling up on our couches alone and watching any movie at any time we want. Also, this planning that people had to do, I think it gave people more things to talk about. Because in the 90s, there were only a finite amount of movies available at one time instead of all of the movies that we have available at our disposal today anytime we want. So it was more common for people to talk about a specific movie. All of this is to say, by thinking about how our days of life have changed, we realize that our personalities have changed too. Even with just 2 decades less of technology, I think that we would probably be more interesting, social, nuanced people, and we would probably be a lot happier. And although it's difficult, we have to remember that we're not beholden to this. We can engineer our lives in such a way that this stuff doesn't matter as much. And even though I'm 23, I'm really trying to do that myself. I'm trying to set the habits now. And you can see I use just a notebook here in the show. I don't use a laptop. And that's just one of the ways that I'm trying to wean myself off of technology and become a more competent and interesting and social person. Our real lives are just too precious for us to live them online. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today. It is so much fun to be with you. And remember, each of our thoughts, choices, and actions shape who we are. So let's think clearly, choose wisely, and act with principle and determination. See you soon. Thanks so much.